All right, there we go. Good. So everybody will be able to hear us online. In compliance with the Freedom of Information Act, notice of meetings and agendas were posted and furnished to all news, media, and persons requesting notification. I'd also like to take just a minute to introduce Chris Dubuque. He's replacing Peggy Potts. Stand up, Chris, just real quick. Chris is replacing Peggy, who did retire this past January after almost 14 years of service to the county. So Chris is our new monitoring program manager, and he comes over from the planning department. He did code enforcement there and was a county arborist. And prior to that, worked for State of California State Parks in Southern California, which is where he's originally from. So welcome, Chris.
Awesome, Chris. Welcome. Glad you're here, man. Appreciate it. Glad to be here. If I could I get an approval of the meeting notes from October 12th? Thank you. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. At this point, we need to elect a vice chairman to replace Elizabeth Haygood. I have a nominee myself, but does anybody else have a nominee they would like to put forward with vice chair spot? I would like to nominate Taylor Scarden to take over for Elizabeth. Thank you. I think it's as simple as a vote. So all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you, Taylor. Glad to have you board, man.
Thank you.
Next, public comments. Do we have anybody signed up for public comments?
No, sir.
No. Okay. Great. All right. At this point, I will turn the meeting over to Eric for the GreenBelt program update.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this update is going to reflect the 6 projects that you all recommended to County Council, which were all approved back in November. So those are the changes that you'll see in these figures, 194 total approved projects. And you can see the breakdown there between conservation easements, fee simple and minor improvements, as well as rural and urban for each of these categories. 24,655 total acres protected by the GreenBelt program, with more than half of those being conservation easements and a bigger chunk of those being rural than urban. We've awarded $134.9 million total. This is coming at an average cost per acre of $5,357. As you would expect, fee simple and urban are more expensive than conservation easements and projects in the rural area. This has generated a match of $173 million, which is $1.28 for every dollar awarded, and 43% of the acreage and 87% of total funds expended are on projects that provide some degree of public access. This is a snapshot of our current available funding. Just over $16 million for rural projects and $2.6 million for urban, for a total of $18.6 million. And as you all know, our urban allocations further divided out based on the population inside of the urban growth boundary to each municipality and the unincorporated area. With the Council's approval of Folly Beaches project, that did involve forward spending, so they are now just over $200,000 in the hole, and it'll take them about 5 years to be back on top again. And then, as usual, the urban unincorporated is about $4.5 million in the hole, and we're looking at around 8 years for that one to be positive. But overall, lifetime balance projections are in the column on the far right, and you can see that we're expecting about $87.5 million to be available for the remainder of the program that's currently unallocated. Our goals, you can see the percentage of goals over on the right-hand side. And I'll just note that the biggest jumps in percentage towards reaching our goals come from urban lands with the Ingleside Weber tract. That was a large acquisition, 440 acres, or will be a large acquisition of 440 acres. And then the Botany Bay tract also helped us move considerably closer to our rural lands goal. And closings. Since the last time you met in October of 2022, Oakville Burden Creek, Church Flats Battery Expansion A, Keefe Kinlaw Scenic Buffer, Little Britain Jenny King, Horace Park, Peters Point Road Vergot Easement, and Legacy Live Oak Memorial Park have all been completely closed out. You'll notice that 3 of those were from the last cycle, so congratulations for those folks getting on top of things and getting their projects closed right away. We've still got 10 projects pending closing, and they're all listed right there. The ones that I have been working on with the applicants recently are Botany Bay Heritage Preserve Expansion, Ingleside Weber Park System, which I believe that's anticipated for June or July, and 1321 Sumner Avenue. I also know that the ADA walkover at 34A Beach Access is just about completed, and they're in the process of getting their documentation together for reimbursement out there on Isle of Palms. We just closed our FY23 winter application cycle on January 27th. We have site visits scheduled for the 21st and 22nd. You should have received emails about those. Just contact me if you'd like to join us, and I'll provide additional details. Subcommittee meetings for those projects will be March 15th and 22nd. One note on those is that council chambers will be closed down for renovations in March and probably April of this year also. So we're going to be meeting in a couple of different rooms, and I'll make sure you have that information well in advance. The next GAB meeting to consider the recommendations from the subcommittee is planned for April 5th. I know it's usually the second Wednesday of the month, but that is spring break. So I know last year we decided to do it the first week to avoid conflicts with folks' spring break vacations. And then we'll open our first cycle of FY24 on June 5th. And that'll be open for about 8 weeks until July 28th. Happy to answer any questions you may have. Yes, sir.
Remind us why Somerville is in the list of allocations.
Somerville straddles all 3 counties of the Tri-County area. So it's got population in Charleston County, Dorchester, and Berkeley.
I didn't know that.
Yes, sir. All right.
Yeah, by all means, keep going.
Okay. All right. Next, we have a presentation regarding salt marsh conservation and migration. Rachel Hawes is here. She's the Land and Wildlife Project Manager from the Coastal Conservation League. Let me just switch over presentations for her. All right. Thanks. Rachel, you're welcome.
Hello. Thank you for having me today to speak with you all a little bit about our salt marsh and the importance of conserving it and how land protection plays a role in that. I'm going to keep it super brief. There might be some time for questions at the end. But I am the Land, Water, Wildlife Project Manager at the Coastal Conservation League. I know some of you are probably familiar with our organization, but just in case, we are a nonprofit focused on environmental advocacy and conservation within South Carolina. Our mission really is to work with the balance of conserving our natural resources and also humans in the space that we take up, and kind of finding a balance so we can all thrive in our area. A little bit about us. We have a few different programs. One is the Land, Water, Wildlife program, in which I'm a part of, but you also might be familiar with our Communities and Transportations program, Energy and Climate, and then our Food and Agriculture program is called Grow Food Carolina. We have offices throughout the whole coast, with our main office being located in Charleston, which is where I'm based, but my kind of area of work is the whole coastline. This is just a quick about me. I didn't know if you wanted to know this, but yeah, I'm from Charleston. I have a couple of degrees, one from a master's program here. I used to work at DNR and at the Nature Conservancy. So we have approximately 350,000 acres of salt marsh in South Carolina, which is a lot of salt marsh. That is, we have the most out of the Atlantic states, kind of tied with Georgia. There's a little bit of debate over whether Georgia has more or South Carolina has more, but of course we like to say we have more. 40% of Beaufort County and 33% of Charleston County are made of coastal marsh and wetlands. So I threw that Charleston County number up there, obviously, because it's very relevant to you all. We're also coupled with ranked as the 5th in the country for being hit by the most severe storms, and we have an 80% tropical storm impact, chance of tropical storm impact each year. And so how do those two things relate? The good news is that our salt marsh habitat can actually help protect us from those threats. But it is threatened. So as sea levels continue to rise, as you can kind of see in that graphic there, our 350,000 acres of salt marsh have two survival strategies. So one of them is just increasing their elevation straight up by trapping sediment. So think about sea levels rise, the salt marsh needs to go up so it doesn't drown, right? That is typically more of a man-made kind of, we have to help that process. It's not necessarily a natural process for the salt marsh. There are various restoration techniques that are used to kind of help with that process. The other option is for our salt marsh to start to naturally migrate backwards or landwards towards the higher mainland. So think about it kind of just shuffling back upland, right? You've probably seen this before on properties that are starting to maybe flood a little bit more along the coastline. You start to notice more salt, water tolerant plants growing in that area. It's that same concept. However, there's a bit of a problem when we start putting bulkheads up in developments along our coast. Hardened structures and bulkheads prevent that salt marsh from migrating, and it's called like squeezing it out is the phrase that we use. And we know that's happening all along the southeastern coast, but especially in Charleston, right? So this map of the Charleston area, the magenta is the coastal marsh, and the bright blue is kind of the ocean and sea level rise. You can see that the marsh is the first habitat to be submerged by sea levels rising. This is problematic because we know that most of these shorelines are also hardened and developed, causing that squeeze of our coastal marsh. This graphic is, I'll give credit, this graphic is from that state article series that they came out with on sea level rise and some of our coastal development last year. So if nothing's done, South Carolina could lose up to 23% of its existing salt marshes by 2060 and 73% by 2100. Given us knowing this, throughout the whole South Atlantic, this is a problem. So the South Atlantic Salt Marsh Initiative was created to help conserve. We actually have 1 million acres of salt marsh from North Carolina to Northeast Florida. A lot of partners got together and recognized this threat and came up with this initiative to create a salt marsh conservation plan. Here are some examples of the partners. It's actually housed under the Department of Defense. It is modeled off of America's Longleaf Restoration Initiative, which is a successful restoration project that has conserved our longleaf pine habitat in the Southeast. So many partners are involved in this. Over 300 actually are involved in this in creating a conservation document to help conserve our salt marsh in the face of sea level rise. It's just a series of recommendations and strategies to conserve that area in the land corridors. So for example, 3 of the strategies on that are conserving our existing salt marshes. So what can we do to keep what we already have? Restoring our salt marshes. So what about the ones that are lost or are struggling? How can we restore that area? And then protecting the migration corridors. So I see you all really playing a role in that third bucket, right? Protecting that corridor area where that marsh is going to migrate. This is just a map I threw up there. I know it's a little bit hard to see, but really all you can get out of it is that yellow-brown area is where the marsh is anticipated to migrate into. So not just thinking about our first shoreline, but also think about upriver, right? So as sea levels continue to rise, our rivers are going to get a little bit saltier, and that marsh is going to actually start going up our rivers a little bit as well. So when I say land corridor, I really mean that whole space, like a few miles inland, right? Not just the 1 mile on the coast, but actually inland as well. So I'm going to ask of you, really just, I know you're already doing this, but just emphasizing other things to keep in mind, is prioritizing land within marsh migration corridors. So by protecting our salt marsh, we're also increasing our resilience, supporting our economy, especially our recreationally and commercially important seafood industries. 75% of those industries, those animals that we like to eat, rely on the estuary or that marsh habitat at some point in their life. And it also supports our recreational activities, which I think that brings in about $1 billion to our economy alone. And that's all I have. Thank you so much. Do you guys have any, questions aloud?
Thank you, Rachel.
Thanks.
Thanks, Rachel. All right, next up, we're bringing back to you the Fort Pemberton public access plans. Some of you may recall when that project was approved, council put a special condition into that award that said before any of the minor improvement funds would be dispersed, that they would like to approve of those improvements. So let me get the next presentation queued up for you here. And we've got Matt Compton here, City of Charleston Special Projects Manager.
Yes, sir.
All right, thanks, Matt.
All right. Good morning. Thank you for allowing me to be here. My name is Matt Compton. I work in the City of Charleston Department of Parks and the Capital Projects Division, and live around the corner from Pemberton, so I'm really excited about seeing this one come to fruition. For those that don't know, Fort Pemberton is at the northwest corner of James Island. It's on the Stono River. It's about 8.5 acres of highland, 270 or so linear feet of frontage. There's 2 existing docks on the property. It's the golf course, the municipal golf course, is just in the bottom of that photo there. Riverland Drive is the street that's running north-south on that image. And this is the last piece of what used to be about 35 acres of property over there that was around the fort that's been nibbled up over time. We purchased it in 2019, and then right about the time we were ready to work on it, COVID hit, and so we stopped for a little bit, and then the community input process began in earnest last year. So there are, that's the existing access to the property coming off of Aubrey Drive. Our intention is to utilize this access, which takes you to the fort interior. And apologize for using a Google Street View image. I did not have one of my own that showed everything I wanted to show you, and it looks better on a small computer. But Stono Drive basically dead ends at this, the north side of the property. And Aubrey Drive is the dirt road that comes in there. We want to bring in a secondary access at this location. So there'd be 2 points of access into this park. And when I show you the plan, it'll make a little bit more sense. This is the interior of the fort space. There's an existing garage that's over on the right-hand side. The existing house is kind of hidden behind the old bomb-proof that's in the background of the photo. Both of those structures we would propose to remove, not as part of the GreenBelt funding, but as part of the overall project, so that we can better utilize the space that's within there. This is a view from the top of the fort at sunset, looking out over the lawn that is in front of the fortification. And this is the same view of that lawn from one of the 2 docks, looking back at a nice gentle slope that comes down from the fort. That would have been an intentional aspect of the earthworks at the time. So spend a little bit more time on this slide. So the property is largely wooded in the northeast corner where the earthworks are. And the driveway that we propose to reuse is coming in off of the Yates Avenue side there. And once we get to the fort interior, we would have a small parking area that would be gravel parking with a little bit of paved parking for ADA compliance that would take advantage of that existing open space in there. We're going to probably reconfigure that parking layout a little bit and maybe utilize some of the existing pavement that's there with the garage if that makes sense. And so the heavy dash line is intended to kind of convey how the circulation would work within the property. The house is shown kind of the bottom left corner of the fort. It would come out, and then the picnic shelter, also not part of the GreenBelt funding, but the overall use of the space would get configured in there where a cannon would have been placed at one point. It would kind of be a usable space, and then a restroom structure would be over near where the garage is. Again, not part of the GreenBelt funding, but part of the larger project that's taking advantage of the existing utilities that are there. The path within the fort would be ADA compliant. The path connecting from within the fort around to the front side would not be ADA compliant. So we need to bring in a secondary entrance off of the intersection of Stono and Aubrey, which is the small parking area that's shown up in that corner. And again, that's going to change a little bit. We missed a tree that didn't show up on the survey, but is worth reworking that parking around. Another small space, another small amount of paved parking for ADA compliance. And then the soft path would connect to that parking and then swing around down to the docks. We want to hold that path off of the critical buffer, 25 feet off the shoreline, and we're actually proposing to install that path about 6 inches or so higher than the existing grade to create infiltration basins down at the bottom end. We'll have a net decrease in pervious area with the demolition of the housing and the garage that's on the site, and then the gravel is partially pervious. We're using a compacted plantation mix, so we anticipate basically a wash on the amount of stormwater runoff that we have, but we want to account for that by creating a couple of small areas where the water can gather for a brief amount of time and settle into the ground, and it's already doing that. We would like to reconfigure the 2 existing docks that are there, again, not with the GreenBelt funds, but as part of the overall project, to get rid of the boat lifts, which are not, we don't need them for public docks, and make sure that they meet public dock standards, and then set one of them up to accommodate fishing activities and the other one to accommodate kayak launch activities. So that's basically the intent. We're going to bring in access points from 2 locations, one existing, one new. We want to connect those points with a path system that allows you to walk or bike through the park. And we want to provide access to the existing docks that are there. We'll have facilities on the interior of the earthworks, which are, it's nice and shady in there so that you can have an opportunity for picnic. And then there's room for historic interpretation. So in addition to the GreenBelt restrictions that are on the property, prior to us acquiring the property, the South Carolina Battleground Preservation Trust put conservation easements on top of the portions of the property. And so that's the area that's highlighted in red there. And that really strange configuration is in large part due to the plan unit development that had been approved for the site. So it was responding more to the proposed buildings that were on there. And so we're working within that, and we've sent the same plan over to the South Carolina Battleground Preservation Trust to ask for their concurrence. With the exception of 2 locations, we are completely outside of the easement area. The one that's closest to the center of the property is an area that had been previously identified as a utility and fire truck access corridor that we intend to use for a cross connection. And then down by the water, we would have that path that would be 6 inches or so above the raised grade. But I think their primary interest is protecting that viewed shed down to the river, which we intend to do for the whole width of the property. And we're going to work with them. We can't bring a ramp down the front of the fort. So, we struggled with how do we provide the required access, and so we think that those two access points are the only way that we can reasonably meet the requirements. And so the combination of the GreenBelt minor improvement funding and an LWCF grant, Land and Water Conservation Fund, which is an equal amount of funding, will allow us to implement this project. We think, based off of if the pricing settles down, we should get pretty close. So that's kind of what we're looking at. It's, basically paths, a little bit of parking, and some site furnishings that don't show up at this scale: benches and swings and picnic tables, signage. For the basic rule signage, we're going to have to figure out how we can do the historic interpretation, because neither the GreenBelt funds nor the LWCF funds allow us to do historical or interpretation signage with the funds. So we're going to continue to look for opportunities for that. So in summary, 8.5 acres of Highland. We've been working with the community. We're still working with the community to kind of tweak the placement of the path and where we might want to input some landscape buffers, or not input some landscape buffers so that we don't block some views. We have the two entrances for ADA requirements. We don't think that either property or parking area will be visible from outside. So we're going to work closely with CPD to make sure that we set it up in a manner that makes it enforceable for them. The neighborhood has asked us to figure out a way to put automatic gates on. So again, we're going to try to figure that out with the LWCF funds. It's a low impact development. We're going to have a net decrease in pervious area. We're going to take advantage of the existing topography and flow it down the hill to catch the water and allow it to soak in. And actually the critical area probably, at least we're giving a little bit of room for some marsh migration as it catches up with us. And then we think it works with the South Carolina Battleground Preservation Trust. We're waiting on them to confirm that. And we believe it's consistent with all the different requirements that are out there, but we'll go through all the permitting. We'll get SHPO to sign off on it. The hardest one is going to be getting through the city's stormwater process. Even though we're not doing anything, it's a process. So, any questions?
Mr. Jones.
I may have misunderstood, but you referred to, I think, a road, the heavy dotted line. That is a road for cars as well?
Bikes and pedestrians.
No cars.
No cars.
That's good. Thank
And
you.
no golf carts.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. The intent is to, at each parking area, to stop golf carts and cars at that point. And so if you want to walk or bike inside the park, you can, but no riding down to the dock to see the sunset in your golf cart.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions from Matt? Is this just an update, or is there an ask pertaining to this?
We are looking for a recommendation to county council on whether to approve the plan for their improvements because of that special condition. And then if your recommendation will go to county council.
Okay, Mr. Jones.
Well, I think we need your opinion first. I mean, this is there's a lot of information there. It's over my head. I mean, I couldn't really make a recommendation. It may be first class. I don't know, but I need your view.
I agree with Mr. Compton. I think it's going to be a better plan than what's there now. They're reducing impervious surfaces total. They're protecting the fort, and they're keeping that view shed open to the river. So I would recommend approval.
Yeah, Christiane.
Will this plan, if it's approved, be attached to the agreement? And I ask this because it is a conceptual plan and they've still got funding to work out. They're obviously dealing with a lot of different entities on this. So are they going to have the ability to make modifications without having to go through an entire process again?
I might defer to Mark a little bit on whether it would be attached to the agreement. I don't think it would be. The way the special condition reads in the grant agreement is just that county council has to approve the plans for the improvements in the park before we can disperse any minor improvement funds.
Okay.
Does that sound accurate to you, Mr. Bell?
And typically when we have not included to my knowledge, conceptual plans and on the grant agreements themselves. Now, this case is a little different given that there was a special condition from county council. I think ultimately they will come down to your recommendation to council and then council's ultimate directive to staff, once they vote on it. So that we can't fully answer at the moment.
I would think if there were major changes, if they were to want to add additional structures that aren't shown here, then that would need to go back to council for approval.
But it seems like, as a question, you're very firm on this plan. In theory, it should sail forth just like we see it here.
I mean, the path alignment might move 10 feet, 15 feet one way or the other as we're working out the details and get into detailed survey.
Right.
I mean, this is a 80 scale drawing.
Yeah.
So when we get down to like where the road connection ties into Aubrey, we were looking at it in the field yesterday, and actually we need to slide it over this way, but we've got a really narrow window that we're working in. So it's going to be, at 80 scale, it's going to look just like that.
And one good point, I think, Matt, also is don't the LWCF funds require that 4F map? So they're actually even more limiting on what you can do on this property than our current grant agreement.
That's correct. So we've got the South Carolina Battle Ground Preservation Trust conservation easement over a portion of the property. We've got the GreenBelt restrictions over the property that would allow us, in theory, to transfer the property for some other use later on. But then the LWCF 4F requirements, this is going to be a park. So it is technically possible to get a 4F removed from a parcel, but I don't see us finding another 8.5 acre waterfront parcel within walking distance of this to move those restrictions to later on, which is what it would require. So between the GreenBelt program and the LWCF and the South Carolina Battleground Preservation Trust and SHPO and all the other requirements in there, it's going to look pretty much like this.
Sounds good. Any other questions, or is there perhaps a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Thank you. We have a second. At this point, we can debate it internally if there is any debate or thoughts y'all would like to share with the group.
I would like to add, if we could, to the motion that any sort of minor modifications from what we're seeing today could be approved by staff, and only in the case that there's anything significant, such as a structure or something like that, would it have to go back through the process with the GAB and County Council.
That sounds good. Do you accept that to your motion?
Yes.
Is that clear enough?
I think Nora may need, Ms. Kravick may need to accept the amendment as well.
You accept, Nora? Okay. Okay, great. All in favor of this motion, please state with an aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, great.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Okay, the next one is a conversion request for the town of Mount Pleasant's Billy Swales Parkway extension. Eric?
Chairman?
Yes.
I'm going to recuse myself and be available for questions.
Oh, great. Okay, thank you.
And it is Billy Swales Boulevard. I keep calling it Parkway for some reason. So
Okay, yeah.
just a technicality there. So just a reminder, our ordinance 1424 does speak to these, what we call conversions of greenbelt land. That's whenever you're changing the use of a property to one that no longer exhibits the characteristic that qualified it for acquisition. As the ordinance currently reads, to convert the land, it requires a 2/3 majority vote from the GAB and a majority vote of county council. There's also a finding of fact that the property would no longer exhibit the characteristics that qualified it for acquisition, which both of these issues that we'll address today will give you the staff recommendation on that. And then assuming that you do want to approve it, then the GreenBelt Fund recipient must replace that with land of equal fair market value and or a cash contribution. And that cash contribution would go back into the allocation from which it was originally awarded to be used again in the future. So our first one is the Billy Swales Boulevard extension. Just to orient you here on the map, this is the existing terminus of Billy Swales right here at Hamlin Road. And this is the GreenBelt property. It's actually 3 parcels that are going to make up the future park, but only these 2 were purchased with GreenBelt funds. And then the highlighted area in yellow shows where the conversion will take place when Billy Swales crosses the very northern portion of the 2 GreenBelt properties. So we're using the same formula that we've used in the past on other projects where roadways have come through and impacted GreenBelt properties. It's the same formula that we used in 2018 with this very property when the traffic circle was implemented on Rifle Range Road. So the town has a recent appraisal that values the entire property at $185,000 per acre. GreenBelt only funded 23% of the total purchase price. So when we multiply that, we get a GreenBelt value per acre of $42,550. There's 2.22 acres of roadway that'll go through that northern section of the park. So we come up with the cash contribution back to GreenBelt is $94,461. Happy to answer any questions you may have. There's also representatives from the town, should you have questions I cannot answer.
I got a question.
Yes.
Yeah, I tried to figure this out while I was doing. Can you go back to the slide that shows the map of Billy, right there? So based on what you just said, so we're just looking for, they're going to extend Billy Swales through that
Through
park
here.
area, right?
Yes,
So it's
sir.
just going to be the 4-lane, or how many ever lanes it is? 2. Is that right?
Two lanes with also multi-use path running along the side as well.
And will it cut through the middle of the area, or is it just going to take the side?
If you follow my laser pointer there, it'll continue right across this northern portion of the property right here, and I believe it pops out through this corridor.
It keeps going.
Keeps going this way.
It keeps going there.
Sure.
The roadway you're seeing on the other map where Billy Swales is already exist. This will continue on and connect to 6 Mile Road, where there is another portion that's actually called Sweetgrass Basket Parkway. So it'll be a continuous parallel route in between Rifle Range Road and Highway 17. This is a longstanding CIP project from the town. This is the last segment to be constructed that you see going through here. And the alignment has been adjusted over time because we've worked pretty hard with Army Corps of Engineers and through the NEPA process to avoid a lot of wetlands. And that's why really kind of the swing that you see coming up towards the top of the park there.
And has the park been developed yet?
No, Mount Pleasant just approved at the last, in November, a referendum. And $40 million is slated to develop the town portion of this park. Part of this is owned by Charleston County Parks and Recreation. They don't have any plans at this point in time, but we already have a conceptual plan, and the voter-approved referendum will go towards all the improvements. Not the cost of the road, that is a separate expense. All the referendum funds will go towards the park.
Thank you.
Does the northwestern kind of corner and that little swath of land above the road, does it work well in the conceptual plan now that it's separated from the rest of the property, or y'all kind of have a plan for how to deal with that?
We don't have anything specific. The majority of our portion will be obviously developed, as you go back towards Rifle Range Road with the various elements that we have. So this would be just an open space area generally right there. And then we will have, you can see there's another roadway kind of running, I don't know how to use there it is. There's another roadway already running through here. So this area up in here will all be open space, and then Mount Pleasant Way is being constructed along both access roads. So that will be kind of running along this open space right here, a 12-foot section of Mount Pleasant Way.
Sounds good. Mr. Jones?
Actually, my question was almost identical to yours. It's it sort of lessens the value of the northern part of the property, with a major road going through it. Just an observation. And the utility from a greenbelt point of view would be somewhat less, in my view.
Well, as I stated, the location of the road was ultimately a product of a tremendous amount of work through the NEPA process and with the Army Corps of Engineers in order to avoid wetlands.
Yes, Andrew.
I would assume that area would be mostly used as a buffer in between, some of the adjacent residences and the park/roadway, either left in its existing condition or planted to do so. Is that accurate?
More of the existing condition,
Yeah.
correct.
Was there any thought to buying back those portions, those up on the northern side?
No, I think we intend to allow that to remain as open spaces. And they can serve as a buffer. We do have some neighborhoods. This is a newly developed one here and some other ones that are here. So I think that it does kind of create a nice open space in proximity to those homes.
And given that the Mount P Way, is that the name of it?
Mount Pleasant Way.
Yeah, because it's going to run alongside it. I mean, it will function almost like a little pocket park, even though you have this much bigger park below it.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Mr. Jones?
That's it.
That's it? Okay. Any other thoughts or questions? And if not, is there a motion to accept this request?
So moved.
Okay, we have a motion to accept this request. We have a second. Any debate? Then all in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed? Okay, the motion carries. Next is for a conversion request of a portion of 10 Mile Community Heritage Farm.
All right, this is a slightly different conversion request than you've reviewed in the past. This one does involve the 10 Mile Community Heritage Farm at the end of Gadsdenville Road, just north of Mount Pleasant. So the GreenBelt property is the TMS number ending in 063 in this area, and then it extends out to the east and north. The private residence is located right here next to the GreenBelt property, and we discovered an encroachment with their driveway and driveway circle, and then a small sidewalk down in this area had been paved in concrete on the GreenBelt property. So clearly that's being used for private purposes and not the public GreenBelt purposes that were stated in the application. So we've met with the landowner several times. And what they're proposing, or the 10 Mile Neighborhood Association is proposing, is to allow this landowner to purchase the land around these improvements. They have in the past, they've had folks come down this gravel drive at night thinking that it was a public road leading through to the neighborhood that's actually behind this house, and a car crashed into the house at one point. So their intent is to purchase this additional property, which is around 0.4 acres, and then put up fencing and landscaping to delineate their property line, or what would be their new property line, from the rest of the GreenBelt property. So here's a summary. The property owner would purchase around 0.4 acres from the GreenBelt property. Exact acreage would later be determined by a survey that would be paid for by the property owner. Cost of acquisition would be determined by a new appraisal paid for by the property owner and verified by the county. And just for reference, over a decade ago, the purchase price for the GreenBelt property was $160,000 per acre, which would equate to $64,000 per acre in 2011 dollars. So there would be a new appraisal completed. But what we are asking for is for you to consider this request in concept, same with county council, and if approved, the exact dollar figure and exact acreage would be determined by the survey and the appraisal.
Questions for Eric on this?
I will note, property owner and president of the 10 Mile Neighborhood Association could not be here today. They're at a surgery. They couldn't.
Yes, Taylor.
Yes.
What's the GreenBelt property being used for?
Right now, it's just passive green space. They have, in their original plan, they had plans for community gardens, which they have done in the past. They've had some raised bed gardens out there. Ponds, they have started digging those ponds, and then a trail going around the property as well.
And what organization is managing? Is it the homeowners?
This is the 10 Mile Neighborhood Association.
How large is the GreenBelt property? How many acres?
Total GreenBelt property, Jen, you probably know this better offhand than me, but it's 6.4, between 6 and 7 acres.
Andrew.
I have a question. It wasn't exactly clear on that diagram. Is this cutting off portions of the property, or is it just kind of taking off some of the end, right? Is it creating a block, if you will?
It's creating a smaller or a larger out parcel and what is a larger rectangular parcel for that property. So what you're seeing, and I'm sorry, I should have provided a larger aerial view of the area, but the rest of the property goes northeast from there. So it would not cut off the public from any of the GreenBelt property.
Okay.
And the only option really is to make them remove these improvements, right?
There's really 3 options: to remove the improvements that are there, to allow them to purchase the additional acreage, or the neighborhood association could propose new land to be traded for this 0.4 acres of equal conservation and financial value.
Is it the staff recommendation to go with this path?
It is. When you look at the house, you'll see it's right up against the property lines already. Mm-hmm. I know they did get a variance from the BZA to be able to build that close to the property lines. And I think as they develop that park more and it does become a public park, I would recommend that we delineate the private property a little better from the public park facility. And the funds will go back into the urban unincorporated pot, which we all know is forward spent right now.
At 2023 pricing.
Repricing, yes, sir.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I think this is the cleanest way to do it and avoid future issues. Give them a little more space there to.
It's just kind of a strange precedent, but
Yeah.
I don't know. Okay, that's good. So everybody's heard the staff recommendation. Any other thoughts or questions for Eric on this?
I have a question about the appraisal, how they're going to appraise that land, like the value they're going to give it, because if it's not buildable, and I mean, it could be appraised very, very low, have almost no value to somebody else. You know,
we could certainly have the appraisal updated for the entire GreenBelt property, just like we did with Mount Pleasant, and then take that percentage of the entire GreenBelt property to get the value of the 0.4 acres.
That's a good idea.
That would keep it consistent, at least with how we've done things in the past.
Can you repeat what you just said?
So the appraisal could be for the entire GreenBelt parcel, and then you get a per acre price, and then multiply that by the 0.4 acres, rather than assuming, have an appraiser look at that as just a 0.4 acres that couldn't be built upon.
I mean, we should at least get back what we paid into it, right?
Oh, absolutely. I would guess it's going to be closer to double that.
And one other question: the property owner, is that the limit of their lot, or do they own other parcels there?
That's it. where the house sits. Now, I will say that GIS is typically off just a little bit. It's not as good as a survey.
Yes, Francis.
And I was just going to ask, are they in compliance as far as what they said they were going to do with the property right now?
They are. They have a separate issue with permitting and that the ponds were not permitted. So they've stopped work on that. And then they're going to have to go back and retroactively get that work permitted going forward. But they haven't, we didn't have a specific deadline for them to complete all of their improvements. But they have started with the ponds, and I did get, since the president of the neighborhood association couldn't be here, I did ask a few questions that I thought you all might ask, so I'll be happy to share those with you. But I did ask for an update on park development, and they said property has been cleared, the ponds are in the process of being dug. They're working on a landscape redesign to include walking trails, planting sweetgrass and veggies and flowering plants in other areas. And that they have been working with Clemson Extension, South Carolina State University, and the Medical University of South Carolina's Urban Garden on this process. But there's a sign up, it's open to the public now if someone wanted to come out, walk around the property or have a picnic.
Taylor.
Just one more question. Where does the GreenBelt property, how does it go? What does it look like right now? I'm just trying to, the picture.
Tell you what, let me just pull that up for you.
Yeah.
It's Hamlin, Gadsdenville. So this is the Greenbelt parcel. And this is where the encroachment has occurred.
So it already had that little curved part on it, huh?
So what, best I can tell is there was a plan, this was going to be about 20 homes on the water, and there was a development plan with that Clarksville court coming in, and it showed the circle there, and where that house is located was going to be the amenity center for the neighborhood. So the road was put in, but that was the only improvement that was ever made to the property when it was being marketed for development. So it looks like to me they paved the circle that was already there with concrete and then added the sidewalk that encroaches down there on the southeast side and the little driveway that goes to the shed on the northern side of their property line.
Well, based on staff recommendation, it seems like a motion, or I guess I would make a motion to accept it based on the staff recommendation, but with the language included that it's only acceptable because it was such an odd-shaped lot before, and because the Greenbelt encroached right up to the house. Otherwise, I don't think we should do it because it just sets a precedent that if you want a chunk of Greenbelt land, you just do something that encroaches and we'll make a deal. But in this case, I'm not saying that, because I don't know the whole story, but I would motion, I will put forth a motion that we accept the staff recommendation with the included language that it is because of the odd-shaped nature of the lot and that it does square off the lot, making it a more logical property to be adjacent to a Greenbelt property. That would be my motion.
Beezer, quick question. Would you be willing to add in that they do put in a demarcation feature of some sort, whether it be a fence or something like that, to mark off where the property starts and stops? Because I think maybe that was part of the issue in the first place.
Yes. Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
Let me restate. I motion that we accept the staff recommendation to approve this purchase, provided the buyer define the private property better and the ending of the GreenBelt. I also wanted to state for the record that we are accepting this because it is an odd-shaped lot and it is more logical as a squared off lot to the GreenBelt. Is that clear?
I'll second.
Thank you. Okay. Any other? Now we can debate it.
I have a question.
Yes.
Is this in the urban unincorporated?
Yes.
Okay, so whatever gets paid will go back into that.
ma'am.
Right. Which is depleted right now, correct?
It is.
Okay.
Forward spent for the next 8 years.
I think
As a
it needs to be
boom
some
home.
kind of a penalty, because basically we're gonna sell this guy a thing wholesale. Like if they appraise this as 6 acres, I'm assuming they're gonna do it not as under the protections, because then the appraisal even goes lower. Then you're giving this guy an acre of developed land at a fraction of what it would cost if someone was to go out and say, hey, here's this neighborhood of 6 acres, I'm gonna buy one of those lots. So I've got an issue with how they're gonna appraise it, and you're basically giving him a bargain for encroaching. So I think there should be some kind of a penalty involved. We don't have to sell it to them at appraised value. We can say plus a percentage or plus a dollar amount because, you've done this, some kind of a penalty, because just, you're basically giving them a bargain for encroaching on the GreenBelt property. More, that's my thought on it.
That's a good point. I wonder, Eric, is there a penalty in our current guidelines or bylaws that would, relate to this infraction?
No.
Okay.
We don't need one. We can say when there's a condition of sale, we can just say,
Sure.
I'm
just
you can rip all
curious.
that stuff up, or if you want to buy it, you're going to pay us this amount more so that we can do something better with it.
And we will certainly take a real close look at what type of appraisal they need, just to make sure that the scenario you're talking about is not happening prior to accepting their appraisal. And
I could add a little bit more to it, that we get to approve the appraisal.
Yeah.
Or would it make sense for them to come back with the appraisal first so we can know what the purchase price would be, and then we can not have to worry about unknowns?
I'm looking to the attorney here just to make sure that I can present all this correctly.
Members of the board, my concern at the moment is that the ordinance does not really, speak to the amount that you can charge or penalties that you can add. It says that the conversion can be based on whatever the appraised value is. So setting a specific dollar amount or adding your own penalties is really not within the GAB's purview. Now, you can, recommend to council that they accept a fair appraisal value, and they may want to consider in the future, adding penalties or something on their own. But you, as the GreenBelt, do not have the authority to implement your own penalties based on the current ordinance.
But we could make it pending our acceptance of the appraisal, right?
And that, as an advisory body, then not really. You can tell them that, hey, we recommend that you go with the best appraisal value that can be gathered, but saying, we are the body that controls whatever amount we accept as the county that's not within the GAB's purview.
Can I ask one more question?
Yes.
A little bit different. I'm assuming if you did something like that, you'd have to go to the county for a permit, and then the county would look at that and even get a survey. I mean, did the county look into this and say, hey?
We notified the county of the improvements and the encroachment and found out those were not permitted. But they're at a standstill until they find out that county council is actually going to accept this recommendation to sell that property. If they approve that, then they'll go back through the permitting process retroactively. because county council may say, we'd rather them take it all out, and then there's no permitting issue.
Yeah.
So just for clarity, the driveway roundabout was installed on GreenBelt property as an encroachment.
When it was paved, that's when the encroachment started.
Okay, so the dirt road was already there.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
As well as the sidewalk down on the southern portion, and then the, you can see the driveway that goes to a shed, I believe, back there next to the house.
Okay, so there was already an existing pattern of use when the GreenBelt property was purchased.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
It was supposed to be the drop-off point for the amenity center based on the original residential development plan.
Okay. Thank you.
So the structure wasn't there.
No, sir.
When did they build that? Or do you know?
It was shortly after the Greenbelt property was purchased.
Did they do the circle and everything at the same time, or do you know?
No, that came in later.
So they, okay.
That was probably a year and a half ago.
So they knew they were doing it then, most likely.
They claimed that they were unaware of the property boundary, but that was one of the questions I had for them.
Does the driveway fall under an access easement as well as the circle, or is it unnecessary because it's a public park?
Don't know the answer to that.
Okay, one more issue here. The circle before and the established pattern of use gave a GreenBelt visitor kind of a clear way back out. And currently, or the way this is set up, it's a true dead end. So we eliminate our exit, kind of, or a turnaround. Wouldn't that be an issue?
If you're going all the way to the end, normally when we're on the property, we park up front.
Okay.
But yes, sir. If you got to the end, then you'd be doing a 3-point turn there, or going over the grass.
Is to park at the other side of the park and then walk the path, or
Yes,
fish,
sir.
or whatever you're doing.
Yes, sir. You can kind of see it's fairly wet in this area, right through here, and most of the uplands out towards the road, the higher ground.
Okay, I stand by the motion to accept the staff recommendation with the caveat that it's better defined and staff approval of the appraisal. So if you don't like the appraisal, you can reject it.
We will get with our real estate division prior to turning them loose on their appraisal to tell them what type of appraisal they need to have done to reflect the actual value.
Okay, yeah, Jason.
Because it should be appraised at single-family residential value, not park value.
Especially with the Greenbelt restrictions on there. Yes, sir, understood.
You want me to restate? Got it.
I think we have it.
Okay. Yeah. So the motion's out there. Any other debate or second or thoughts?
I'll second.
Okay, we have a second. Again, debate. Good to vote? Okay, here we go. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, the motion carries. Hope that works out. All right, next. Annual consideration of borrowing versus pay as you go for sales tax proceeds. Eric?
This was a request as part of our 5-year plan review that we started last January 2022. And after looking at the current situation, we looked at 4 factors: available funding, project demand, interest rates, and the land cost forecast. And you all asked me to bring this to you at the first meeting of each year to help determine whether or not you wanted to make a recommendation to county council for borrowing funds against future proceeds, or to continue our pay-as-you-go method that we're doing right now. Available funding is $18.6 million. We do have a cycle that will draw that down a bit. New allocations will come in July. Got my month wrong there. July 1 is the start of the fiscal year. This past year, we had about 12.5 million total in allocations, and we're expecting somewhere around that same amount. Project demand, I went back the past 4 grant cycles, and we've awarded 3.9 million over the past 4 cycles. To my knowledge, there were no projects that were not funded because there wasn't funding available. Interest rates since January of 2022 have gone from 0 to 0.25%, all the way up over 4%, as you're all very aware of, I'm sure. And land values are actually now expected to stabilize due to all of these factors. The land purchases are slowing down, and then market conditions that we just discussed with inflation and rising interest rates are all impacting that projection for land values to basically level out, if not drop a little bit over the next few years. So that's the information you all requested. Happy to answer any questions.
We would only need a motion if we change something. It's perfectly reasonable to just keep going as we are, no motion needed, which is definitely the path I support. But any questions for Eric, or a motion, or anything on this topic? Okay, if there are no questions and there's no motion, then the path we're currently on stays.
Yep, we'll update you again in about a year.
Okay, sounds good. Next, review and final approval of 5-year plan review recommendations.
First of all, just thanks for your hard work over 2022. I know those were more meetings than this body's normally used to, but that 5-year review is something that's required by ordinance, so thank you for your work on that. Just going to provide you a very brief summary of the discussions that we had over 2022, and some of those you made recommendations on, and please stop me if you have questions about any individual item. Bonding, we just looked at that again, and we'll continue to review that annually. Our forward spending is one of the biggest issues that we tackled, and there was a recommendation on that by you all. It's a 1.5-page policy, and to summarize it, bridge funding is encouraged wherever possible, where the applicant finds their own funding, and then they can be repaid from future allocations. And then there was a recommendation for true forward spending that there would be a 10% cap of projected lifetime balance for projects with excellent scores. This forward spending cannot adversely impact other projects that cycle. It cannot borrow from rural funds if rural funds are below 6 million. You have to maintain that 6 million floor. There'd be no new awards in future years if you have a negative balance until it comes back on the positive side. And there was a request for a 2/3 supermajority to make a forward spending recommendation. That's by the GAB. We looked at impervious surfaces, and really, after talking about it, said these are most useful on fee simple and most practical on fee simple, non-active, non-corridor projects. And we've got a sliding scale there based on the size of the property. Generally, the larger the property gets, the percentage of impervious surfaces goes down. These would be standard with any new applications if approved. During the application process, we would notify the applicant if one of these applied to them, and then they would be able to request from you all if they felt it necessary to have a larger or smaller percentage of impervious surfaces, and then they can try to make that case to you all in county council. One note is that we determine property size by subtracting any marsh or open water features and just using the upland. We discussed use and improvement changes after award. There was no GAB recommendation on this, but what SCAF discussed is that we will work to improve our application process to gather more a better picture of all the uses and improvements that they might consider for that property. And we also felt that the impervious surface caps would help with this and give the applicant a little more flexibility as long as they're staying underneath that cap. Park development and public access deadlines. We've got a good many properties, and we're going to bring you a report on this later in the spring, that have not opened to the public yet or not implemented the improvements that were promised in the application. For the most part, we've treated these on a case-by-case basis, and because all these projects are so different, that was the recommendation of staff, was to address those that you're concerned about with special conditions on a case-by-case basis, because a standard deadline probably would not be feasible for these projects. And we really want to focus on those projects when they offer their improvements, future improvements, as match, because that gets their score up on the application. If that never happens, you can see the conflict there. We discussed noncompliance enforcement. We had hoped that we could write tickets for noncompliance just like a code enforcement officer could, but found out that is not a legal option for us. The transfers and conversions procedures, which we just practiced today, there is no GAB recommendation, but what we discovered was that we're the only body that only advisory body in the county that could essentially stop a project from going to county council if it did not get a 2/3 majority vote. Staff is recommending that we just bring that in line with the rest of the county, so that every recommendation or every consideration that the GAB makes is a recommendation that county council will receive, and not necessarily be able to stop a project from council consideration.
Excuse me.
Yes, sir.
Can I just ask, we're obviously at odds here with the legislation or the ordinance. I can't remember discussing that, and I'm sure we did, but the GAB, why wouldn't the GAB agree with staff if there was a difference that that's obvious there? Why wouldn't we try to rectify it?
There was just no motion when we discussed the topic.
Should we have made a motion?
You're welcome to do that now. If you would like to do that, we can certainly update the plan. Anything you'd like to change, this is the time to do it.
I missed your first part of that. I couldn't quite hear you.
Well, I read it, not that I fully understand it, but it seems that we have an issue that our actions are contrary to the ordinance. Staff is recommending that we bring our actions or proposed actions in line with the ordinance, and it seems to me that that's a good thing.
But it would actually be changing the ordinance to bring it in line with other commissions to where you all are making a recommendation to council, and not require both your 2/3 approval and council approval to make these changes to a property.
But you would recommend the change?
I'm recommending the change, and council has already discussed this in one of their meetings, and they know that they're planning to do this.
So it's in their court, so to speak.
It will be officially when we present these recommendations to them.
Yeah.
And Mr. Chairman, and if I can clarify, and I think Mr. Jones's one point is that he's questioning why the GAB itself has not made a recommendation on this particular item, when the GreenBelt director has said that he supports the change, because this change will make this body more in line with its purpose, and the purpose is to advise council on actions that it should take, and not prevent council from doing things that council is empowered to do.
Thank you, Mr. Bell.
Well said. Thank you.
So just as a clarification, we don't need to make a motion. You've already recommended this to council, and they are more than likely going through with it. So we don't need to take action on this.
You don't need to. We're going to provide them this document, the same one that I sent out to you all in advance of the meeting.
Okay.
If you all didn't make a recommendation, I tried to provide the discussion around it, and if staff felt one way or the other, then I put that recommendation in there.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a quick question for the attorney. You spoke earlier on a different item about us being an advisory body. Am I I know how the planning commission functions in that a negative recommendation can still be sent on to the elected body. Is that, how is this working here?
So
We have a negative
you are correct. Where the planning commission and is also advisory, similar to Greenbelt, and their yes or no's do go to council in that way. Currently, then the way the ordinance is construed and the way it's being implemented is that and if 2/3 of you guys do not say yes, we support this change, there's no further deliberation on it. And so our problem is that, well, hey, the deliberation should not stop here. Council needs to see that.
Okay.
And so the director is proposing changing it to where whatever you guys decide, whether you agree with the change or not, that decision will ultimately reach council, whereas currently it is not.
Okay, all right, so this isn't just a matter of having a simple majority with a positive recommendation. It is to have a simple majority recommendation, whether it's positive or negative, will still make its way to county council.
That's correct.
Okay.
Instead of saying you must have this and this,
Okay.
it says you must get a recommendation from the GAB that will then go to council for final
That makes
decision.
sense.
Mr. Jones.
This would go to council. A council member would say, well, it makes sense to me, but why doesn't the GAB have an opinion? Which I would think would be a reasonable question.
Your recommendation will go to council.
But we have no recommendation presently.
But I think based on this conversation, what we could do here is that we support the recommendation that is coming from staff. We could make a recommendation, it's my understanding.
That would be my view too.
I don't know. Any other questions for Eric specifically?
I just make clear, I've been following this. So let's say if a project came up in the subcommittee or in the GAB and no one made a motion for approval, so nothing was done, would that issue still go before council?
So Mr. Bell, make sure I'm saying this correctly, but my thought would be that if there were no recommendation or the result was a tie vote, then it would go to council without a recommendation from the GAB, letting them know that was a tie vote or you all deliberated and decided, no motion was ever made. Is that?
Yes, that is correct. The distinction that I think is causing some of the confusion is that this is a particular isolated scenario where we are now trying to convert properties that are not in compliance with the Greenbelt, and so they rarely come up, which is where the whole 2/3 is coming from. So we are trying to rectify these isolated scenarios that we just saw today and make them in line with the rest of your recommendations, which, to your point, whether you guys say yes, it's good, we can't reach a decision, or no, we recommend that you deny it. All of those do go to council, and so we want this isolated matter to also go to council in the same manner that the rest of your votes do.
But a tie vote with no recommendation still gives council the information they need to do what they need to do. There's the information is available to them, or that is an indicator of sorts. Correct?
That is correct.
Okay. All right. So, anyway, I don't know where we are here, but
Well, can I make a motion that we adopt the staff recommendation in terms of this issue?
I'll second.
somebody please restate it then.
I think it's easy enough to say the staff recommendation is to bring this board in line with other county boards to make sure that all of their recommendations go to county council. And we can work out the exact language. Once council approves that, we can work out that language in the ordinance because it will require 3 readings.
Thank you.
To change
Mr.
the
Jones,
ordinance.
is that your motion?
I give up. I don't know.
I'll make that motion
Okay.
as expressed by staff.
Second.
Got it. And we now have a second. Any debate on this topic? Jason?
That is just for the transfers
Right.
and conversions procedures portion of this slide.
Mark?
That's my current understanding.
That's the only part of the ordinance that's written that way, that requires the 2/3 majority and council approval.
Any other debate, thoughts, comments before we vote? Okay, we have a motion and a second for the staff recommendation. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed? Thank you. The motion carries.
Thank you. Public support criteria was the next item. You all did make a recommendation to change this, and the primary change was separating out what we call individual or grassroots support letters from our regional and national advocacy organizations that seem to write a letter for every project. We also talked a little bit about our 2 points for favorable results of a public meeting or a survey. Right now, it just says you must hold or you get 2 points for holding a public meeting. We want to know what those results are, same as if you do a survey. Recommended changing our funding and leveraging criteria to make it really a linear progression for those points. There was a big jump between 25% and 74%, where all, whether it was 25 or 74, it was the same amount of points. So we're essentially adding another layer and increasing the points in increments of 3. Urban unincorporated, we talked about the funds being forward spent and no funding being available for quite a while. And there was no GAB recommendation on that. We have seen in the past where when urban unincorporated projects are supported by the municipalities that are near them and they feel those projects provide a benefit to their residents as well, that they've helped fund those projects. And we also feel like the small landowner program could help with these because so far all the small landowner program projects have been in the urban unincorporated area.
Very good, man. Mr. Jones.
The small landscape program, the recommendation to get no recommendation, but it's sort of at cross purposes here. A recapitalization, you are proposing that's your recommendation, staff recommendation, but in the light of the fact that there's been no requests since 2011, it's sort of, how shall I say, is it really an issue? I mean, maybe I don't think that we've even talked about it. We don't recommend, we don't support the staff. We don't have an opinion on the staff, but is the staff recommendation of recapitalization?
No, sir. No, sir. That's just a note that basically says, should you all or council choose to recapitalize the small landowner program in the future, then it would also address some of our issues with urban unincorporated. But there was no recommendation either way from staff or the GAB on those 2 items, so we're just going to report the discussion that we had on these 2 issues to County Council.
Any other questions for Eric? Yes.
It's not a question, it's just a point. I just want to make sure we're all understanding that if this were, our recommendation of no forward spending, then there wouldn't be any urban unincorporated allocation till about 2030, for the next 8 years. So I just want to make sure we're all aware of that we would essentially be putting a halt on that spending for the next 7-8 years. That's it. Just wanted to throw that out to the group because that would be a result of our prior recommendation to update our ordinance on forward spending.
Is that observation correct?
I believe that's we do make that note in the full document that will go to council as far as the situation with those funds.
Council could change that somehow, but we don't address it in our plan. How to
You did not make a recommendation on that. Originally, the small landowner program was funded with rural funds. They can be used in either the urban or the rural area. So if you decided to try and change the allocation formula for either of these programs, you'd have to determine where that money would come from. And then, of course, council would have to approve that as well.
Could you go back to that slide that addressed forward spending?
You also have the full 5-year plan recommendations in hard copy and the full forward spending policies attached to it.
I would like to comment for just a second on the forward spending. I don't have an issue with the first part of it, which is the bridge funding recommendation. I do have some concerns with the second part of it, which is the borrowing from other allocations, and it's what the majority of those bullets on the slide represent. I know this kind of grew out of a number of meetings, and we've had a lot of discussions on it, and I think over those time and through those discussions, it's gotten complex. A couple of questions or points with all of this. I can't remember, and you've answered this question for us before, Eric, how many years we have left in the program as a whole. I wonder, because of current balances, and you showed just a second ago on a different slide about how much is being allocated annually, if maybe this is not a little bit premature to enforce these kind of limitations when we've got so many years left in the program. I do think at one point in time we are going to reach a point where forward spending should not be allowed at all. And I don't know when exactly that would be with what we've got left in the program, but there should be a halt to it. But implementing it now, and especially like, I don't know, I can't figure out the math myself, but the cap with the 10%, I was looking, when you brought those slides up earlier with Folly Beach, I'm kind of thinking they couldn't do what they did.
Correct.
And so I think it just places some constraints on people when they've got opportunity in front of them that maybe isn't going to be there later on, that perhaps is a little bit premature with where we are in the program right now in the lifetime of the program. So that's just comments, my thoughts, my opinions on that part of it. Again, the bridge funding, I think Charleston successfully accomplished that with Fort Pemberton is my recollection. But I think that this has gotten just a little too complex and might affect some opportunities.
So to answer your question, believe the current second sales tax goes through 2032, 2033, and of course those are all projections on how quickly they collect. The first sales tax, the first half penny, is going to expire within the next year or two. And there have been some discussions that have started about a reauthorization of that original half penny sales tax that could happen as early as go to the voters as early as 2024. And then we did discuss during one of our discussions on the forward spending about how the smaller municipalities should perhaps be treated differently than the larger municipalities because their amounts are so small in the grand scheme of things. Somerville forward spending, all of their allocation is a very, very small percentage than if Mount Pleasant forward spent 10% of their allocation. We didn't differentiate any of those, but we did discuss that.
Mr. Jones.
I have some sympathy for what you say, but I think we spent a lot of time on this issue. And I'm not saying what you suggested is wrong, but could we sort of pass this so we can move forward and perhaps bring it back in 12 months' time? Just because if we're going to change the 10%, I think we're looking at a lot of time spent again on discussing whether it's 10%, 20%, or something else.
Yes, Jason.
I don't have an answer to your point, but can you remind us when the draft policy was brought forward? I don't recollect that we ever voted on that. Did we? We
Yes.
did?
Yes.
As it stood?
It was amended to raise the original recommendation of 5% to 10%. I believe you made that amendment as directed by the mayor.
Right, but did we, so it hadn't gone to county council yet?
No, sir.
Right, and,
No.
and what's stopping that? Because we haven't
I
finalized
wanted to provide one final recap since we've been working on this stuff for over a year now. Recap all the decisions that were made and get one final, we're ready to send all this to county council.
Because I don't disagree with Christiane in that it's getting into the weeds on this forward spending policy, not broken yet. And I would just recommend that we try to really simplify it. And then if, based on the slide you've already shown on how much money has been spent over the past couple of cycles or whatever that slide was, we're trying to fix something that's not an issue right now. And per Christiane's note that, there will be a point where we don't allow any forward spending. But right now, if there's a property that's under the threat of development and or is going to cost more next year, then we're putting ourselves into a corner that's going to jeopardize the original purpose of the Greenbelt is to protect dirt.
Okay, I would like to just make a policy point that, let's try to gauge all this in terms of question, Q&A for Eric, and then when we have a motion, someone come up with a motion and then we can debate it is how we're supposed to technically do this. But anyway, carry on. Taylor.
Let me ask you a question, Eric. If I was kind of concerned because you want to always leave a little bit of a way out, but since everything goes to council, and if it's a good project, we can say our procedures prevent us from approving this because of the forward spending limits, but it is a good project, and if council agrees with that, then we would recommend that they pass, because they're not going to be bound by this, right?
Mr. Bell?
Ultimately, council looks at all of your recommendations and they decide how they want to proceed with them. So I believe that over the course of the year, the way the forward spending discussions have gone, and it would be a matter of the Greenbelt Board recommends denial because it has exceeded our forward spending limit. However, the project received a score of whatever numerical value the project received. And county council would see, hey, this project received a score of whatever that value is, but the GAB said deny because of forward spending limits.
So then county council could go against the GAB recommendation?
Yes, and so then at that point, council would see, all right, I have a project and I have a committee recommendation, but we as county council like this project, and so we as county council want to do what we want to do, which is their authority to do.
All right, which the CAB couldn't recommend because of their procedure.
Well, I thought that we kind of went over this a way back, but I thought what we kind of came up with, we had that whole super project kind of idea of something that exceeds it, but we came up with what we don't have to deny it. We could just put a note on it saying we approve this despite it exceeding the forward spending cap. Just send that to county council and say, just be advised, this is more than our it's out of our norm, but we still think it's good enough to go forward. I thought that's kind of what
We had
came
that
up with.
accommodation in here.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah.
I don't think we speak specifically to that. I mean, it's called, this is your forward spending policy that you've come up with. So this is the recommendation you're making to council. There's no override button type of mechanism that you all have included for yourselves. Now, again, council can make any decision they want. Your adoption of this policy would not bind council to that same policy.
No, I'm saying for us, we can send it to them we don't have to deny it and send it up denied. We can send it approved with a note that says, this exceeds our 10% forward spending cap, just be advised of that. And they can, but we still approve it because we think it's that good. I mean, what stops us from doing that?
Mr. Mills, I will confer with the Greenbelt director later on, but I believe what you are addressing is the 2/3 supermajority on the bottom. From my recollection, the body had discussed if a project is not, or if a project is exceeding our forward spending limit, we will deny it, but we will recommend denial of it. But I believe we were talking about it. If there are 2/3 of us that say, well, while we do have this forward spending limit, this project is so great, 2/3 of us said we want to ignore that in our recommendation. And I believe that's what you're speaking to.
Policy as written says if you want to approve a project for forward spending up to 10%, true forward spending, then you ought to make a recommendation to do that or requiring a 2/3 supermajority of yourselves. That's what that means.
Andrew.
Does this affect the ability for applications to come to us. As in, when we say no new awards with negative balance, will a project in an area that has a negative balance even be able to reach the subcommittee?
Good question.
I would think no. There's no money there.
That's just for the group. That's part of my concern, is that we are, with that, we are limiting ourselves to even make a special project case. And I feel like, I think I made this comment before, but I do feel like whether we want to do a 2/3 supermajority or not, it's the same outcome either way. If we don't feel forward spending is worthy of a particular project, then we vote for disapproval. But ultimately, it's council's decision one way or the other. That's just the way I see it.
Question or motion? Question for Eric or motion?
I would make a motion that we hold on forward spending decisions for a year and reevaluate where we are at that point in time with funding, percentages, allocations, and then take it up then again.
Second.
So we have a motion on the table.
Can
I have a question for the motion, but Mr. Jones, you're first.
Okay, this is for the 5-year plan review. I'd go along with the 1 year, look at it in 1 year's time, but this is for the 5-year plan review. Can we do this? Can we say in the 5-year plan, this is our plan, but we want to look at it in a year's time?
I think so.
It's semantics,
Yes.
isn't it?
Mr. Jones, to answer your question, I believe what the GAB is now proposing, and then is simply making a note to county council that, forward spending has been an issue for our projects, but, and ultimately we will continue to deliberate on it for a year before making any other recommendations. But as a part of our 5-year process, we are updating you on what has occurred over the past 5 years.
Okay, well then I second the motion.
Can I ask for an addition?
Yeah, so debate now, or you can ask for addition or whatever. So would you like to ask for the addition?
And as I understand the motion, I would like to see from the staff as we go through these, the impact this would have on the different projects. For example, if there was a project that wouldn't have been brought forward like Andrew was talking about, like say, in the briefing from you for the GAB, this project would not have come forward had we passed the forward spend. So we
Got it.
understand, and we live under it for a year. But
So we
without-
kind of test drive it for a year.
Correct.
Gotcha.
I would like to make a request of the person who made the motion that we retain the language and the significant work that we have in this formula of forward spending to assess it on this basis in a year and not rebuild it, because that was a pain to create. And we really worked hard to make sure that we were trying to cover every angle. So when it comes back up in a year, it would be my request that we consider it on this basis and not a new basis.
Yeah, I would accept that amendment as it was the intent of my original motion. We've spent a lot of time to get to here, so yes.
Okay. Mr. Jones, do you accept that?
Well, I'd ask legal, it's sort of like binding on the Greenbelt Advisory as composed in 1 year's time with the decision we make now. I don't think you can do that. Am I firm ground legally?
Typically, it's not advisable then to be, binding, future bodies. But I believe, this proposed amendment is really not necessary to the motion. I believe the motion is simply to defer the topic that is on the table for a year. Then the topic on the table is this actual policy document that has been presented before you guys.
And Mr. Bell, that would take care of the prior passed motion from the previous meeting that recommends this to council.
Bang.
Please remind me, what was the previous motion?
The previous motion was to approve this policy, or recommend approval of this policy as written.
Yes. So previously, then there was a motion to recommend this go to council, and now in lieu of accepting that motion, a motion has been presented to defer that motion to a later date, and so that would take
Okay, I have a solution to that, I think, if you'll allow this suggestion. I would ask that you amend your motion to accept the entirety of the 5-year review plan as written, except for the forward spending, which will come back up in a year based, and at that time, we would consider the language that exists.
So for clarity, so we've already made a motion and accepted a motion for a different portion of the 5-year plan.
Good point, yeah, good point.
So,
Including that one.
yeah.
Who made the motion?
We're working through it.
Okay, well, we simply restate the motion.
It's coming.
Right. My point was, we've already made a motion on a separate aspect of this 5-year plan review that we voted on this afternoon or this morning. So that was just a point of clarification.
Yeah.
So my motion is to accept the 5-year plan review with deferral on the forward spending portion of the motion.
Are we all clear on that?
That's pretty drastic, isn't it?
1 year, right?
For 1 year.
Hang on, you just said defer. You didn't say 1 year, but
So
I understood that you said defer.
I'll clarify the motion.
Yeah.
I make a motion to approve the 5-year plan review, except for the forward spending portion of that we will take up in 1 year's time.
I'm sorry, I can't accept that. Not because I think you left a void there for what happens in the next 12 months. You're wanting to defer this part until 12 months hence. So what happens between now and then? Because you're excluding what we're looking at here in this forward spending.
If I may, Taylor kind of addressed that, is that we continue on as we are and we measure it as we go and try to see how we abide or don't abide by the principles of this forward spending, these parameters, and then coming up in a year with those guidelines slightly tested, we'll be better informed to make a good decision on this.
I don't disagree with any of that, but I think that the motion, as it was made, doesn't say that. I agree with you.
I will accept to add Taylor's points from earlier in the meeting, restated by the chairman just now, that over the next 12 months, we will utilize the work that we've done on forward spending to test any and all applicants coming to the GAB that we could then use as data as we take this up in a year for more analysis and approval.
I would agree with that in the smaller sentences and paragraphs.
Okay. So we have a motion.
It's a quick question. In a year's time, will we potentially have a referendum to the county on extending the half-cent sales tax? Because I think the extension of the program, and if any allocation from that referendum would go back to the GreenBelt, then you're kind of extending the life of the program. Is that an accurate assumption?
That's accurate, but in a year's time, you wouldn't really probably even know yet if it were going to be on the ballot.
Right.
But if the wheels were turning for that, then you could always defer again to find out the outcome of the referendum.
Right. I don't mean to complicate things, but I feel like that's an important piece with the forward spending. Just as points were made earlier about the life of the program. At some point, you got to stop the forward spending because there will be no more money. But there could be an extension of the program, in which case maybe we feel differently about that. That was not to confuse things further. I just wanted to.
And that's now on the record, so that's a good point. Do we have a second for the motion?
I thought I seconded. Yes.
Yes. Oh, we do have a second. Okay, excuse me, sorry. Okay, any other debate or questions or thoughts? All in favor of Jason's motion, please state with an aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Fantastic, the motion carries. Let's move on to the GAB attendance policy.
Okay, so I brought this up at our last meeting. Clerk to Council did reach out and ask that we bring our attendance policy more in line with other boards and commissions. Got some concern from some of our GAB members over that policy, so this is intended to be a compromise between the stricter Planning Commission version and the current GAB version, which basically just says when you're absent, you need to notify the chairman in advance. This adds to that staff will provide an attendance report to the clerk of county council's office for distribution to council members in every December. We do this anyway. They ask us for that. And then the third part is a member of the commission who is absent for 50% or more of the meetings automatically vacates and gives up their seat.
Questions? Yes, Mr. Jones.
I'm not happy about the last part. I mean, it may be fair, but I don't think we have the right to do that. It may be something that we would desire, but council members are appointing us. I think it should be a letter pointing out the absence of this particular member of the GAB and to the council member asking, well, just leaving it at that with the inference is you ought to do something about it. I don't think that we as a body can just say, sorry, buddy, you're out. I don't think we've got the authority to do that.
Hey, Mark, what do you think about that?
And I'll have to verify what all the other county boards and commissions say. But then the intent of this is to bring this body into the exact same rules that all other county council bodies follow. And then this is a request that the clerk of council has presented to the GreenBelt staff. And so then this is the attempt to make this body in line with on all the other county boards.
So Eric, are we supposed to take action on this, or is this is all set up?
Since it's changed, our rules actually read that this needs to be introduced in one meeting and then actually considered in the next. So this is a new proposed policy from what I presented in September or October. So this will be for information right now.
Okay.
And we'll bring it back at the next meeting. If you have changes you'd like me to make in it, please provide those, and I'll try and bring you something back that you all can approve.
Mr. Jones.
The paragraph that I'm referring to, are you saying that you molded that on what pertains to the BZA and the Planning Commission, or is that just something that you thought would be appropriate for us?
So the one I presented in October was the exact model of the Planning Commission and BZA, and it's even more detailed and talks about excused and unexcused absences, and if you have more than 3 of this or 2 of that in a year. We thought this simplified it. I'm just saying if you miss over half the meetings, then you're giving up your seat.
So it is identical.
This is new, but
The new one is identical to the.
no, the one that was presented in October was identical to the other commissions, and we received feedback from you all on aspects of it that you felt should be taken out.
Well, I can tell you I wouldn't have agreed to it, but then again, I might have been outvoted. I can't remember. But anyhow, I stick with my comment.
Oh, sorry. Did you have a comment to that?
The only comment is Mr. Davison is saying that the policy that was previously presented was the exact same that are on at least 2 other county boards and commissions. And so our directive from the clerk of council is that this body needs to be in compliance with those. This new proposal is a modified version, which is, for lack of a term, less stringent than the others per the request of the GreenBelt.
I'll give you.
Okay. Any other questions or thoughts on this informational statement?
I don't like the third one either. I think that arbitrarily, I mean, I realize it can bring some compliance, but you could have something in there where you just recommend to whoever appointed you or make them aware and say, do you still want this person here because they're not in compliance, something like that. But what happens if you have an illness or something, you're bound to this. So
Wait, could
if
we
your county councilman or your municipality wants you as the member,
Yeah.
then they're stuck too.
Okay. Nora?
I think it should be up to the council member to ask for the resignation, not us.
Are you hearing that? Okay. Any other questions or thoughts for Eric?
So strike item 3 when I bring this back. Got it.
I have one comment. Why don't we just have the county have a blanket policy for all the boards and commissions instead of having to deal with this?
You going to tell the council?
Are you getting what you need from this? Okay. Can we move on? Okay. So our final item of business is replacing the great work that Elizabeth Haygood did on the subcommittee. And that responsibility falls to me to appoint another member. Andrew Todd Burke has expressed a desire to get more involved and to serve on a board like this. And for that, thank you for that willingness. And we'd love to have you on the subcommittee. So that would be my appointment. Do you accept?
Yes, sir.
Okay, fantastic. Our next meeting is April 5th, 10 o'clock. Correct? 10 o'clock? Yeah. Yeah, right there. Any other thoughts, questions, observations? Anybody like to share?
Who's on the subcommittee right now? I just don't.
The chairman's always on there. Mr. Charlie, Ms. Kravick, Mr. Scarden. The city rep will be
Me.
Ms. Farrell and Mr. Todd Burke. 6 members.
If you'd like to be, if you want to be considered next go round, you just let me know.
Oh, no. I was just wondering.
Okay. Yeah. Any other questions, thoughts? Okay. With that, we are adjourned. Thank you very much.
Next meeting?
Next meeting, April 5th, 10 o'clock.
You said that?
I did.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
I was in there in my